So we're covering creating business applications using Azure Maps. I'm Michael Washington, a Microsoft MVP. I've actually written a couple of books on Blazor. That's the technology that we'll be using. And I also wrote a book called Azure Maps using Blazor, which covers everything that I'll be covering in this presentation. That book and all the other books are available for free from syncfusion.com. However, the Azure Maps using Blazor book will not be available for download until December. Okay, so the agenda, we're going to cover creating Azure Maps. Again, we're using the technology of Blazor. We'll first cover everything you need to do to set up to use Azure Maps, especially concentrating on the authentication. We'll be covering the authentication that you would need to use in a production application. Then we'll, of course, create the Blazor application and we'll show how to show a simple map, which will show live traffic. Then we're going to, the second half, we're going to cover the Store Finder application, which is your standard application that allows a person to search for locations near their location, display them on a map, allow the person to search, pinch, zoom, that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to cover in the second half of this presentation. Of course, I have all the links. Just so you know, I'll go pretty fast. Everything is available on my website, which is blazorhelpwebsite.com, and I'll have a slide at the very end. Let's dive in. So creating Azure Maps using Blazor. This is what the first half we're going to create. Now, you'll of course say, well, I can do that using Google Maps. Why would I want to use Azure Maps? What I'm going to show you today will only require 8 lines of boilerplate JavaScript, meaning the JavaScript that I'm putting in is the exact same JavaScript that you'll put in for your application. So that's the real thing, is that you'll have this functionality, but you don't have to do the JavaScript. And like I said, the second half of this presentation, we're going to cover this Store Finder application and show you exactly how it works. And I'll also show you how you can download the code on GitHub. Setting up Azure Maps. Basically, you want to go to portal.azure.com, create an account if you don't already have one, and go ahead and sign in. And you'll see at the very top left-hand corner, create a resource. Go ahead and click that button, and you'll search for Azure Maps, and you'll select it, and then you'll click the create button, and then it'll take about 30 seconds, and boom, your Azure Maps object will be created. You'll click the go to resource button, and this is your Azure Maps object. The first thing we want to do is set up authentication. When you click on the authentication section, you'll see that there's two types here. One is to use Azure Active Directory, and the other one is to use shared key authentication. Shared key authentication is very simple. You just simply pass that shared key for all your requests, and the code is very simple. However, when you're showing the maps, the code has to run on the client, in this case, the web browser, in which case your key would be seen. And if someone grabs it, they can then make calls and you would be charged. So you don't want to do that. So what Microsoft recommends for that scenario is to use Azure Active Directory authentication. And that's what we're going to cover next. The first thing we have to do is we have to set up a service principal or an app registration. So you go to the Azure Active Directory section, you click App Registrations, you click New Registration, and you give it a name. In this case, our name is going to be called Azure Maps App. Now, I'll be using the term app registration and app principal or service principal interchangeably. A service principal is kind of like a person in Azure. So obviously it's a piece of configuration, but it's treated like a person and it's given permissions, it's put into certain groups. So that's what we're setting up. So we're going to call it Azure Maps App. We'll click register, and we're going to get two important things: the client ID, and of course, also we're going to need our tenant ID to make calls to Azure later in our Blazor code. So we're going to go ahead and save that client ID and our tenant ID. We're going to need it later. Because again, this is like a person, it's going to need a password. So the way we get its password is we go to certificates and secrets, we click new client secret, we give it a description, we click add, and then we'll be able to copy that client secret, which is, again, it's like the password for this service principal, which is kind of like a person. Next, we need to give it permissions. So we'll go to the API permissions section. We'll click add permission. We'll search for APIs my organization uses. We'll search for Azure Maps. We'll go ahead and select it. and then there's only actually one permission available, which is user impersonation. We'll go ahead and select that permission. Now it shows up in the configured permission screen. And then make sure we click the button that says grant admin consent for a default directory for this Azure App Service, and that part's set up. We're going to go ahead and return to our Azure Maps object. We're going to select the access control section. We're going to select role assignments. We're going to click add, and we're going to search for the Azure Maps data reader role. We'll go ahead and click next, and now we're going to add that service principal. And as you see here, it says, add a user, a group, or a service principal. We create a service principal, and we're going to select that option, select members, search for that Azure Maps app that we just created earlier. We're going to click on it. We're going to click select and review and assign. And now it's been added. This is all the configuration we need to do for inside Azure, and the rest will be in the Blazor app. So go ahead and open up Visual Studio. We'll select Create New Project. We're going to select Blazor Server App. Yes, you can use this code for Blazor WebAssembly. However, it has to be structured differently, and it takes a lot more code. So I'm using Blazor Server. We'll go ahead and click Next. We're going to call this the application Azure Maps. Click Next. At the time, we had .NET 6, but of course, you can go ahead and select .NET 7 now and click Create. And now you have a simple Blazor app. We're going to go to Manage NuGet Packages, and we're going to install 3 NuGet packages. The first one is this Azure Maps control. This is the control that allows us to to display the Azure Maps without our need to write JavaScript. So this is the big thing, and this is an open source project. The next one is going to be this Darton Blazor NuGet package. This allows us to retrieve the user's current latitude and longitude. And the reason why I like this particular one is it works well with both a desktop browser and if someone's using a mobile device. So I really strongly recommend this. Again, it's another open source NuGet package. And then finally, we need to add Microsoft Identity Client, and that's because we're going to use it to get auth tokens so that the map control can communicate with the Azure Maps service to get the map tiles to display the maps. In Blazor, you add the configuration for CSS files and JavaScript files in the layout.cs HTML page. So we're going to go into there, and we're going to add our cascading style sheets. So these cascading style sheets, as you see, are required by Microsoft. Our control will be using this to display the maps, but this is required. So we put that there. We also have this map object here so that you can position it if you want to change the width and the height of the map that's displayed. For the JavaScript, again, these is required by the Microsoft Azure Maps API. So you add those. This JavaScript is from the Azure Maps control. And this is the 8 lines of boilerplate JavaScript that I talked about. And the reason why it's needed is the Azure Maps control, to get a token, it's expecting this method to be there, and it's expecting this method to return a token. How do we return the token? We use this really cool thing that Blazor has called .NET invoke method. What this does is it allows, and this is, of course, is JavaScript code, to call into a C# method. So it's not a web service, it's not a controller, it truly is a C# method. And so the way you do it is you first indicate your project. So again, our project is called Azure Maps, and this is that method. So when we call this method, it's going to return a token. So the map control has it, and then the map control will be able to display the map. So we're going to want to show the map. We're going to go to our app settings, and we're going to add those 4 settings that we set up before. We're going to go ahead and set it up into this Azure Maps client ID, the tenant, the app ID, the app key. And then we're going to create this auth service class. And what this auth service class does is this is that get access token, and it's going to return an access token. In order for it to be called, it needs to be static, and it needs to be decorated by JS Invocable. So that's all that's required for that part to work. The way it's able to get the access token is it needs to use the app ID, the tenant, and the app key. Where does it get that? It gets that from here. So set off settings needs to be called beforehand, passing these settings. It then sets those settings, and then those values are then made available so that it can return um, an auth key. When we go into the program.cs file, we have some using statements that we need, and this is for the Azure Maps control. So first, we're going to get those configuration settings that you saw me put in the Azure app, the app settings.json file. This is setting up the Azure Maps control because it needs the client ID. And then we call this line here, which is that auth service class you just saw me set up, and that set auth settings method. And we're going to pass it the Azure Maps settings that we just retrieved from the app settings.json file. Another look at this. This was up here in the program.cs file. We called that set auth settings, which calls the set auth settings that's in the auth service class. It then sets those settings. Then later in the code, that get access token method is called, and it returns a access token to the this of course is that layout, that's that CSHTML page. This is where it made that call to get the token. It returns it to the map control, and authentication is set up. What's nice about this is that this token is short-lived. So every time a person hits the page, it gets a new token. So therefore, if someone grabbed that token and they tried to use it in their application, it would expire in like 15 minutes. We're going to go now to the index.razor page, which is the main page that will show up when we're running our application. And we just simply put in the Azure Maps control on the page, and it has a onMapReady async method. Let's go ahead and look at that method. The first thing we do is we get the person's current position, which is here. We then get the latitude, we pass the latitude and the longitude and the latitude to the Azure Maps control. We then also can do other configurations. For example, we're saying, show me the traffic. And then it just works. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. Oops, sorry, hit the wrong button. Okay, so here it's showing that when the app first runs, the set auth settings is being called, and it's being passed the tenant ID, the app ID, and the app key. When we continue, we see that the layout.cs.html page, that code starts to run, and it calls our get access token method to get the access token. And you see that the app key and the tenant ID and the client secret, they're all available. And it then pulls back the result. And the result is what has the access token that you see at the top there. And that's the access token that's returned. And that's what the map control needs to call the Azure Maps service to actually get the tiles to display the map. When it's ready to display the map, we see that we first get our current latitude and longitude using that Darton control. We then pass that latitude and longitude to the map control so it can then say, okay, this is where I want to display the map. We also, of course, set the traffic options, which you can see there on line 38, and then the map displays. So again, the whole point of this was done with only 8 lines of boilerplate JavaScript. And let me go ahead and return to the slides there, current slide, there we go. Okay, as promised, we're going to now cover the Store Finder application. This is a simple application where a person puts in their current address or an address that they want to search with. It displays the store locations that are stored in the database. As you see, there's little pins that display on the map. And again, they're able to search and pan and zoom in the map just like you would do, say, for Google Maps. There's also an administration section that allows you to go ahead and click a button. You give a location name, you enter an address. When you click save, a call is made to the Azure Maps API to geocode it and get the latitude and longitude. And that, of course, is how you set up the locations that can be searched on the other page. So how is this set up? Again, these links are available on my website, blazerhelpwebsite.com, but on GitHub, you can go ahead and download the code. This does require a database, so you'll want to create a database. And then if you look in the SQL file in the sample code, you can open that up, grab a script, and when you run that script in the database, it'll create all the tables that are needed. The next thing you do is you open up app settings and you enter your database connection, and then you enter those 4 values that we were using before, the client ID, the tenant ID, your app ID, and your app secret, and it's ready. It will do the work. Let's look at how the store administration part works first. So when you go to administration and you click the add button, a box pops up. It asks for a location name and an address, and then you click the save button. Okay, and then of course it geocodes that address, and it gets the latitude and longitude and saves it in the database. Okay, so what's happening there? So when you click that save button, the first thing, of course, is it needs to geocode the address. So it's going to call this in our service class, it's going to call geocode address, and it's going to pass that address, and it gets it back as a coordinate. It's then going to create a point, and using that coordinate, and it's going to store it in the database as location data. So, and we also, of course, we will store the latitude and longitude in the database. But when we search to find out what stores, what locations are close to another location, we do it by searching on location data. So, location data is a SQL service type, um, and that is actually where the searching is done. So first, let's look at how do we geocode that address. We'll zoom in here a little bit. Okay, so to geocode the address, we're just essentially making a call to the Azure Maps API. So here you can see we're getting our access token and passing an access token, and then we're just making a search where we pass in the address, and this, of course, will then return the coordinates, the latitude and longitude. Now, let's look at what happens when a person does their search. So a person, of course, puts in an address, they click the search button, and then the store locations that are near that location will then show up, as well as you'll see these little markers will also appear related to these, will appear on the map. So how is this done? Oops, I knew I would do that. Okay. So when a person does a search, we of course take their current location and we get their coordinates. We then pass that to a get nearby locations method, which will then return a collection of store locations. We will then center the map on our current location, and we'll set a icon for our current location. And for each store location that's returned, we'll create a icon for those. So how do we do the search for locations? The way we do it is we simply do a SQL query, and the key line here is this one down here, where location data st distance from the location. So this is how it looks in the database and pulls back. So I'm searching by distance, and I have this distance set to, I think, 25 miles. But that's how it's able to find the ones that are close to what you're looking for. There is a object net topology suite that will allow you to do this, so you don't have to do this. I'm doing inline JavaScript here, which I should parameterize. But if you don't like this, you can use net topology suite object. However, in my experience, it was not 100%. So that's why I dropped into using this, which works 100% of the time. And then, of course, that will return the latitude, longitude of each location to the code that you just saw before. Okay, so let's take a quick look at that. So when we go to administration and we do a search, administration, and we enter a new location, when we click save, it'll be geocoded, but most importantly, that location data is now in the database. So then on the main page, when we do a search, those locations are retrieved because of that SQL query that did the search based on the location. And then when we, of course, click on something, there's a marker for each map location. And again, I'm kind of showing you here how the map allows the person to pinch and zoom and do all the normal things that you would expect, in a mapping application. Okay, so everything that I covered here is available on my website, blazorhelpwebsite.com. And then, of course, I also have that link to the GitHub. And that's all I have.
I'm muted. Okay, there we go. All right, Michael, that was awesome. That was amazing. So here it is. I'm just typing in that that link for our guests here.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I should have given you
no
two before.
problem.
I'm sorry.
No, absolutely no worries. That's why I'm here to help. Oh, okay. So that's the website here. And then let's see how fast I can type this live. Okay, def web server / Blazor store finder. Okay. Oh, it didn't like my first push on that one. Okay, so that's the link, everybody. Did I spell that right? Server Blazor store finder. Okay. Michael, thank you so much. We didn't have any major questions. Feel free to drop those in the chat right now for all those watching. And if not, feel free to reach out to Michael on Twitter, on his website, on his GitHub. You are available for all the questions.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Michael. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you everyone who's currently watching. That was creating business applications using Azure Maps.